Greetings and welcome to another edition of the Sunday Sermon with Reverend Riff. I am Reverend Riff, your host. Thank you for being here. This is number 11 on the Sunday Sermon, Season 2, Episode 1, if you will. And I just want to tell everybody how much I appreciate them being here. We're a little late today, as you notice, due to the fact that we were at a show last night. Got to see some of my favorite bands play. Got to go to a dope venue, West Side Bowl. Huge shout out to them. That place was awesome. Kurt passing out the mestos. I love it. And yeah, we West Side Bowl, super cool venue. It's in Youngstown, Ohio. If you get a chance, you should definitely go there and check it out. And yeah, cheers, Kurt. Having a banquet here since it's not 10 in the morning like we normally do. I wanted to do the sermon this morning from the hotel, but the Wi-Fi there was less than usable. So we sucked it up. Lord Hogs, welcome. Yeah, we sucked it up and we moved it to 5 o'clock today. So here we are, and everything is good. Everything is grand. Everything is great. So yeah, and just a brief minute. Got to give a big shout out to one of our biggest fans here, Lord Bale. She not only dedicated 2 songs to us last night, which was stupidly kind, but they played a song for us called Big Fucking Space Dragon. And I can honestly say that that is one of the highest compliments anybody has ever played to me. Oh, why, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, it looks pretty good. But, yeah, Big Fucking Space Dragon. That's one of the highest compliments anybody's ever paid me. So, it was amazing. Love the She guys, Jake the Hawk guys, Pillar guys, all of them. Great dudes. Great time last night. But now on to the things at hand. We're going to talk about the things that we're going to talk about. And what are we going to talk about? We're going to talk about fucking magic. That's right. Magic among fundamentalist Christians is generally a big no-no. It is one of those things that is derided and demonized. It's thought to be of the devil. And there's not a lot of biblical basis for that. It's honestly kind of funny because, especially in the Old Testament, magic is really freaking common, which is what we're going to look at today, and that even the Israelites themselves basically used magic in their everyday life. Like, this was a normal thing to them. So it's kind of funny how we've turned on it in a way and decided that basically certain kind of magic is okay and other magic is not okay. And basically what it boils down to is if the space dragon says that he wants you to do this magic, it's totally cool. But if it's not space dragon magic, then it's not okay magic. So, without further ado, let's dive into the meat of this, shall we? So, let's see if I can get back in here. Yeah, just a secret to get more ad money. That's what it was. So I guess you guys are back now. So the first thing I want to talk about is divination, and not specifically Necromancy. Now, for those of you who don't know what Necromancy is when you use what should be random things and assign that the random outcomes were actually dictated by a higher power, and that's how they're speaking to you. For example, rolling dice, and if you assigned, take a look a 6-sided die and ascribed an outcome to each number, and then rolled the dice and claimed that because it rolled 3, you were supposed to do this. That would be a form of Necromancy. Believing that 3 that you rolled was not random but was decided as a way of speaking to you. It's kind of silly, but So the Hebrews had a very interesting thing. I find very few people that have ever heard of this in the Bible, and it's kind of wild to me because I think it's pretty dope. We're talking about, well, we're talking about the Urim and the Thummim. Now, what are they? There's basically, think of it as God's Ouija board. You needed to talk to Yahweh. You needed Yahweh to give you the dates on something. Should I do this? Should I do that? You use the Urim and the Thummim. They were the key element of the Necromancy, and only the high priest at any given temple could actually use them. Nobody else was allowed to use these, or so we think. There's some discrepancy on that. Some people believe that they could have actually been used. Exactly. And so, it was, you used it, and some people think that, maybe the elder of a tribe could use it or a king could use it. It's very murky. We don't know a lot about them. In fact, we have no in fact, we have no clue what they look like or how they actually work. There's several schools of thought on this. One is that they were some stones in a bag, and that the high priest would wear them inside the ephod, as you remember, the big breastplate that the priest wore, and that he would basically stand in front of the ark and ask yes or no questions, and he would reach into the bag, and if he pulled out one stone, that would mean the answer was yes. If he pulled out another stone, that would mean the answer was no. And if he pulled out another stone, it would mean that God wasn't talking to you right now. And that's a key point, because that's brought up a lot in the Bible, is basically that God doesn't answer them. Or maybe their bullshit just doesn't work. We have, questions about it. But yeah, it was basically a magic 8 ball. That's one way to look at it. Other people believe that it was more magical than just some stones in a bag. Some people believe that it actually, if you remember from our little study of the high priest, the ephod that the high priest wore had 12 stones on the front. They believe that basically the high priest would stand in front of the Ark of the Covenant, and it would spit out like electricity, and it would touch those stones, and the sequence that it touched the stones in would basically spell out words for the Hebrews, and that's how Yahweh would communicate with them. Again, we don't really fucking know what it was, because the Bible never describes it. The Urim and Thummim was used up until about the time of the first temple. And then when Solomon's first temple was sacked by the Babylonians and King Nebuchadnezzar, the Urim and Thummim are never mentioned again. So we don't know if it fell out of favor at that point, or they just stopped talking about it. Nobody knows. This was not uncommon at the time either, which is what makes this so interesting, that, so much of Yahweh's whole MO was separating the Israelites from everybody else, making sure that they were different. Well, pre-Islam Arabs had almost an identical way of divination. They took a quiver and 3 arrows, and one arrow would have yes written on it, one arrow would have no, and one arrow would say nothing. Then they would pray and consult their God about the arrows, then they would reach into the quiver and pull out an arrow, and the stroopwafel? Nice. And they would pull out the arrow, and that would be their answer. So it would be yes, no, or I'm not talking to you. So even their gods apparently didn't talk to them all the time. This was what you called rhabdomancy, which is using water diviners. It's basically, it means using sticks or wood to do divination. Aw, I didn't see what Vasitsky said. Ooh. We having a ton of fun there, Kurt. Nice. I didn't see what they said. Oh, they just want to make me famous? Darn. So now that takes us, so now that we understand there's divination, that takes us to our first story, The Witch of Endor. And I'm not making that shit up. Endor is a real biblical place. No word on if there were really Ewoks there, but I'm going to go out on a limb and say that there were. So, I'm going to set the stage here for a minute. Let's see if we can set the stage for you. So Israel right now, it's in a little bit of, there's a brouhaha, a big political showdown, if you will. What has happened is Saul, who is the first king, is it did not destroy the Amalekites like God told him to. He killed all the men, all the boys, but he didn't kill all the women, and he didn't kill all the livestock. He kept the good livestock for himself, although he did give some to the temple, to the Levites, and he thought that made it okay because he tithed some, even though Yahweh had told him to annihilate these people, just totally wrecked them. He did not. And he also, one of the things that apparently really cheesed Yahweh off in this situation, is there were a group of people called the Kenites. They had been friendly to the Israelites. Remember the story of Jael from season 1? Yeah, she rolled with those folks. And Saul sent them the early word like, yo, you need to get out of, town because I'm going to come down on these dudes like a hammer. And so they were spared as well. And Yahweh was a bit cheesed about this. He did not appreciate that at all. So, what happens? God, the prophet Samuel, who we'll get to in a minute, was told by God, you know what? Saul's not my dude anymore. I am not going to allow him to create the line of kings. I'm switching sides here. David's my new guy. I'm not kicking Saul out of the throne right now, but Saul's son will never be king. David will be the next king. And that goes over with Saul about as well as you think it would. And leads to a whole lot of shit to the point that eventually David goes on the run. And a bunch of guys who have fought with David in wars and are loyal to David, they break with Saul and they go with David. So they're kind of in the wilderness now, living as nomads. And, I mean, again, David is a guy that, yeah, that's why Saul got dumped, man. It was that simple. David was a guy that, for all of the praise that he gets as like the father of the Israeli nation and this, that, and the other, we've already known that he was a horn dog. Well, he's an even bigger dick. David is a fucking gangster. Like, basically a freaking, he's a fascist gangster. There's no other way to put it. And what does this son of a bitch do when the falling out with Saul happens? He goes and joins the Israelites' lifelong enemies, the Philistines. That's right. It is literally the ultimate heel turn for David here. He goes and joins up with the arch rivals, and the Philistines' king realizes that David is money in battle. So he is more than happy to take this guy onto his side and use him to harass and fight his own people. So keep that in mind as we go forward. It's kind of fucked up, if you ask me. But keep that in mind. Oops. Hold on, guys. Sorry about that. I'm destroying my stream here. I could do that all myself. So, they do not want me revealing their shit. Alright, I apologize, guys. No more transitions. We're going to stay on this screen because it seems to work when I stay where I'm at. So that's what we're going to do. So, let's meet the cast of characters for the Witch of Endor story here. First is King Saul. He's first king of Israel. Not particularly popular at this point. He, in attempt to win back God's favor after finding out that the whole Amalekite thing didn't go well, he decided to start cracking down on a lot of behaviors that he had let slide. One of those behaviors was witchcraft and divination. He had issued an edict that all witches and mediums were to be put to death. And his people, as we know from ancient times, that ancient people were all too happy to put witches to death. So that was going on. It's kind of interesting how he actually became king, because the Bible contradicts itself with 3 different stories of how Saul became king, and they're all so different that they probably, one of them has to be true and the other 2 have to be wrong, which is kind of stupid because why are there 3 stories? The first story is kind of my favorite because it's so dumb. Saul was out wandering around looking for his dad's lost donkeys when Samuel the prophet sees him and notices that Saul is head and shoulders taller than everybody else. Dude's height is mentioned several times in the Bible. And so he was head and shoulders taller than everybody else, and he just looked like he was a king. Yes, he was looking for his dad's ass. And since he looked like a king, they made him king. It's kind of a dumb story. The second story involves what we're talking about today, and that's that the prophet Samuel used the Urim and Thummim and asked a series of questions. First it was, are you sure you want to have a king, God? And God says yes. And he goes, which tribe do you want? God picks Benjamin. That was his tribe. And then we got to make Shaq fucking emperor now. And right after that, what happens? He picks Saul. The third one is the one that, if any of them are true, is the one that is likely the true one. In the third one, Saul hears about a town called Jodesh Gilead. They have been surrounded by the Ammonites. And the Ammonites have made a deal with them that they won't kill everybody in the town, but they will gouge all the men's right eye out and take everybody into slavery. It's either that or everybody dies. Saul rallies up some people, and they go down there and liberate the town before that can happen. They rescue the town, and when he does that, everybody's like, you know what? This guy's pretty fucking dope. I think he should be in charge. Head and Shoulders is definitely the shampoo of Yahweh, 100%. That tingle, that's Yahweh magically getting rid of the fucking dandruff flakes. Yahweh hates dandruff. So, that, we don't really know which one of those ways Saul became king, but I kind of think the third one makes the most sense. He spent a lot of his time paranoid about his line. He was the first king, and if you look back at a lot of stuff, you realize that Saul didn't really act as much like a king, as more like just kind of a tribal leader. He didn't have a big palace, he didn't have a harem, he didn't really do a lot of international diplomacy. He pretty much, you can do divination with the dandruff. Yeah, you shake it out, and wherever it lands, it's like reading tea leaves. You can read snowflakes. And he was very worried about his son succeeding him. His son Jonathan, who would have been the crown prince, also happened to be David's best friend. And that really made Saul nervous. And he's about 50 years old at the time of the story today. David, he is a literal rock star. His lute playing and harp playing was like the talk of the town. That was the big thing about David, is he was like the ultimate Renaissance man for people back then. They got moist for David. He could kick your ass in a fight, or he could rock out on the harp. Guy was super popular. And he was declared by Samuel to be God's chosen successor to Saul. Samuel was very clear with Saul that, his son would not be king. It was going to be... he's making his guitar face. Think of that as like the awesome guitar solo face. That's what David's making there. That O face that he's making when he's hitting that note just right. He's probably on like a 32-minute harp solo there, because he seems like the indulgent dick that would play prog that no one wants to hear. It was, slightly awkward that his best friend was the crown prince Jonathan. Although Jonathan, talk about good dude, is never portrayed as anything but supportive. And just like, hey, if God says you're supposed to be the king, you're supposed to be the king. I'm down with that. I don't have any problem with that. He's always portrayed as a real stand-up guy. Yeah, that sounds like something David would do. And as I mentioned earlier, he was living in exile with the Philistines. He was one of the guys. He was basically he was a wanted man at this point, who decided that since Saul wanted to kill him, that meant all of Israel wanted to kill him, and so all of Israel was now his enemy, because unless he was in charge, they were his enemy, because that's mature. Our third character here, the prophet Samuel. He was initially described as a seer in the Bible, which is very interesting, that the whole divination thing, like he was originally described as a guy that had the ability to talk to Yahweh from moment one. Legend has it that his mother was barren, and she had made a deal with God, like, hey, give me a baby, and I will dedicate him as a Nazarite. If you remember, Nazarites are the guys like Samson. They don't cut their hair, they don't drink any alcohol, and they abstain from all foreign people. They only hang out with Israelites. At 11 years old was the first time God spoke to him. It's another one of our Magic 3 stories. He's living with his mentor. He hears someone speaking. He jumps up and goes to his mentor and says, hey, what's up? And yes, he's the original CM Punk. And God said, and his master says, no, that wasn't me. I didn't call you. He goes out a second time. His master says, it wasn't me. I didn't call you. The third time, his master goes, I think it must be God talking to you, not me. Leave me the fuck alone, kid. And sure enough, it was God. And the most important part of this story is that he is dead at the time of this story. So, again, he's fucking dead. Not going to be a problem for his participation in our story. So when Saul saw the army of the Philistines, he was afraid, and his heart trembled greatly. And when Saul inquired of the Lord did not answer him, either by dreams, or by Urim, or by prophets. So you see, Saul tried to Urim and Thummim, got nowhere. So then Saul said to his servants, seek out for me a woman who is a medium, that I may go to her and inquire of her. And his servants said to him, behold, there is a medium at Endor. So Saul disguised himself and put on other garments and went, he and 2 men with him, and they came to a woman by night. And he said, divine for me by a spirit, and bring up for me whomever I shall name to you. And the woman said, sure, you know that Saul has done, and he has cut off the mediums and the necromancers from the land. Why then are you laying a trap for my life to bring about my death? So she sees right through this shit. There's some text that makes you believe that she already knew this was Saul just because he would have been unusually tall, and his attendants would have, even disguised he was still a king, his guys probably would have been very deferential to him. It's also worth noting in this story that I didn't put a map together, but basically Saul had to almost cross behind enemy lines to get to this woman at Endor. So he put his life at risk. He was so convinced that he needed to talk to a medium about the shit that was going down. But Saul swore to her by the Lord, as the Lord lives, no punishment shall come upon you for this thing. Then the woman said, whom shall I bring up for you? He said, bring up Samuel for me. Now, the way that she is believed to have done this is what they called a divination pit. And she would have literally had a pit in her tent that she would have said some spells over and whatnot. And the way it was believed to work was that the spirit could be seen by her, but she could not hear it. And the person that the spirit was speaking to could hear the spirit, but not see them. Why? I have no fucking idea. This is their crazy shit. And so then the woman said, whom shall I bring up for you? He said, bring up Samuel for me. When the woman saw Samuel, she cried out with a loud voice. And the woman said to Saul, why have you deceived me? You are Saul. The king said to her, what's we got here? Okay. Yeah, pits, dragons, magic. Why did they not try to sell us on this shit this way? I'll never know. Why have you deceived me? You are Saul. The king said to her, do not be afraid. What do you see? And the woman said to Saul, I see a god coming up out of the earth. And he said to her, what is his appearance? And she said, an old man is coming up, and he is wrapped in a robe. And Saul knew that it was Samuel, and he bowed his face to the ground and paid homage. Then Samuel said to Saul, why have you disturbed me by bringing me up? Saul answered, I am in great distress, for the Philistines are warring against me, and God has turned away from me and answers me no more, either by prophets or by dreams. Therefore I have summoned you to tell me what I shall do. And Samuel said, why then do you ask me, since the Lord has turned from you and become your enemy? The Lord has done to you as he spoke by me, for the Lord has torn the kingdom out of your hand and given it to your neighbor David. Because you did not obey the voice of the Lord and did not carry out his fierce wrath against Amalek, Therefore, the Lord has done this thing to you this day. Moreover, the Lord will give Israel also with you into the hand of the Philistines, and tomorrow you and your sons shall be with me. The Lord will give the army of Israel also into the hand of the Philistines. Then Saul fell at once full length on the ground, and filled with fear because of the words of Samuel. And there was no strength in him, for he had eaten nothing all day and night. And the woman came to Saul, and when she saw that he was terrified, she said to him, Behold, your servant has obeyed you. I have taken in my life my hand, and have listened to what you have said to me. Now therefore, you also obey your servant. Let me set a morsel of bread before you, and eat, that you may have strength to go on your way. What, buddy?
What are you reading?
I'm reading a Bible story for people.
What kind of story?
A story about ghosts. Yes, that's Declan, everybody. So, one little aside to the story that I think is important, because normally that doesn't happen in these Bible stories. Saul does not have her killed 3 minutes later. He does not double cross her. This is the last we hear of this chick, but yeah, fucking Endor. Yeah, like, it's insane. So, you read that right. There was a fucking ghost. There was a ghost. Now, one of the things that some Christian contemporary authors like to try to claim is that this wasn't really a ghost as we know it. In that, before Christ came and opened the gates of heaven because of salvation, when people died, they didn't go to heaven. They went to a place called Sheol, which was basically almost like purgatory, if you want to think of it that way. It was just a holding spot. And they just stayed there until God opened the gates of heaven. Then, if they were supposed to go to heaven, they went to heaven. And if they were supposed to go to hell, they went to hell. So that's how she was able to pull Samuel's ghost up, is because he existed in this other plane that wasn't heaven or hell. How they think that makes it any less of a ghost story is beyond me, because it's a fucking ghost story. The guy died, then he comes and tells Saul, yeah, that shit I said before I died, it's happening now, because I fucking told you it was going to happen. So, there's no other way to look at this. This chick was a necromancer. And that's pretty fucking awesome, that we have confirmed necromancy in the Bible. So if somebody wants to tell you that the Bible is real and that they are a literalist, then boom, that means they believe in necromancy and that it's real. And that's pretty fucking metal. That means they also believe in divination and all this other wild shit. So, let's look at David now in this story. Oh, and I guess I'll finish it up for you there. So Saul goes into that battle, and it does not go well. The battle does not go well at all. Saul's army is slaughtered. Saul's sons all die. Saul realizes he's going to be captured, and he asks his sword bearer to kill him. The sword bearer, who is an Amalekite young man, no less, says, I can't do it. I'm not killing a king. So Saul falls on his sword himself to kill himself. And the Amalekite kid also kills himself. Yes, even Jonathan. David is super upset about that. And some people think that that is what kind of turns him away from the Philistines. Because the Philistines don't just win the battle. They take Saul's body and his son's bodies, and they decapitate them, and they take the heads to the capital and put them on pikes, and they take the bodies and hang them from the city gates as like a, hey, look what we did. And another little interesting side note, the people that Saul had liberated in the earlier story that I said was the most believable one about how he was chosen to be king, their loyalty to Saul ran so deep, they snuck behind enemy lines and retrieved his and his son's bodies and took them and burned them and gave them a proper ashes-scattered burial. So these guys put their life on the line to keep his corpse from being desecrated. Saul was played by Sean Bean, wearing stilts. So, let's talk about David for a minute while all this is going on. He was working for the enemy. He had spent 16 months raiding Israeli settlements with them. Right before that big battle, the Philistine commanders said, "Nah, we don't trust him in this. He's too close to Jonathan and the other guys. We're not letting him be a part of this." And it's really interesting because they had no reason to think that, but it shows how diverse the Philistine structure of government was. The main Philistine king was David's guy. But the Philistines did not have an absolute monarchy. They had princes that had They had a checks and balances system, and the other guys said, "Nah, we know you. This is your dude, and he's a great warrior. We get all that, but we don't trust him. So no, he's not coming with us." So David was not at that battle. He vehemently protested not being able to fight against Saul and his own people, because obviously he wouldn't have just been fighting Saul, he'd been fighting other Israelites. So again, never forget that David was upset that he didn't get to help kill his friends. Never forget that key point. Let's talk about Nabal. I'll explain why in just a moment. Nabal was a wealthy man, and I mean wealthy. The Bible describes him as like Bezos level rich. This guy had dough. David decided to shake him down. Nabal was an Israelite. And David sends his men, armed to the teeth, into Nabal's home and says, "Hey, isn't it nice how, nobody's been raiding your farm? And isn't it cool how nobody's been, like, killing your servants? And isn't it cool how, like, nobody's stealing all your shit? That happens because of me, bud. So, what do you say you show a little gratitude? You know what I mean?" Yes, David is fucking Vinny Gambino here. He's shaking down again, an Israelite. He's shaking down this guy. I know Eat the Rich is really popular right now and all that shit, but this is extortion, plain and simple. It does not make David a good guy. His wife went and paid David off because, exactly, cue the Godfather theme, because Nabal had said, fuck it. He's like, if I pay this, he was right. He said, if I pay this guy once, he's going to come back and make me pay him again, and he's going to keep making me pay him. He goes, why do I work? Why do I, run my farm if all I'm supposed to do is give shit to every asshole that shows up and asks for it? Right, and they like this guy. This guy, it's the Star of David, for God's sake. And, this guy's a dick. So his wife, David, hears that Nabal's not going to pay. David rallies up the troops. He's going to go burn the whole farm to the ground and kill everybody because, the shakedown didn't work. His wife gathers a bunch of shit and goes, this is not worth it. And she takes David a bunch of stuff. She takes some camels, fruit, food, all this shit. And she's like, please, my husband is an arrogant man because he thinks he should be allowed to keep the shit that's his. And, please take this stuff. So David says, all right, you're cool. The next day, she tells Nabal what happened and that she saved his life because David would have come there and killed everybody. When he found out his wife paid off David, he had a stroke or a heart attack. We just know that he basically dropped dead. Kurt, you're dead on, buddy. That's why we're telling this story. But yet God takes credit for striking Nabal down. Not the hoagie he was probably eating that struck him down. But, So all that happened. Now, why was that backstory important? Kurt's hit the nail on the head. Now, remember, this is when David is going back to where he had been staying because the Philistines told him, you're not going to fight Saul. Now, when David and his men came, David was so into fighting Saul that he had taken all of his troops out of his town and left his town unprotected to go fight Saul. He was that itching to kill Saul. So, while he was gone, some shit happened. Now, when David and his men came to Ziklag on the third day, the Amalekites had made a raid against the Negeb and against Ziklag. They had overcome Ziklag and burned it with fire, and had taken captive the women and all who were in it, both great and small. They killed no one, but carried them off and went on their way. Remember, the reason they didn't have to kill anybody is there was literally no one there to defend the place. Star of Shamgar? I don't know, but I think we're going to have to start that campaign. So, And when David and his men came to the city, they found it burned with fire, and their wives and sons and daughters taken captive. Then David and the people who were with him raised their voices and wept until they had no more strength to weep. David's 2 wives also had been taken captive, Ahinoam of Jezreel and Abigail, the widow of Nabal of Carmel. This guy is unfucking believable. He shakes a guy down. The guy's wife pays him off so he won't kill the guy. Then the guy has a heart attack, and now David marries his wife. Unreal, this guy. And David was greatly distressed, for the people spoke of stoning him, because all the people were bitter in soul, each for his sons and daughters. But David strengthened himself in the Lord his God. So yeah, the people were so pissed off that David had left the entire town exposed because of his blood feud with Saul that they were ready to kill him. And perhaps things would have been better off if they had. Just throwing that out there. And David said to Abiathar the priest, the son of Abimelech, "Bring me the ephod." So Abiathar brought the ephod to David, and David inquired of the Lord, "Shall I pursue after this band? Shall I overtake them?" He answered him, "Pursue, for you shall surely overtake and shall surely rescue." And so David set out, and the 600 men who were with him, and they came to the brook of Bezor, where those who were left behind stayed. But David pursued, he and 400 men. 200 men stayed behind, who were too exhausted to cross the brook Bezor. And yeah, David pursues, David catches up, he kills everybody, and is able to rescue his wives and all their stuff. So David gets all of his shit back. So again, nothing bad actually happens to David. He gets off scot-free despite making the terrible military decision to leave his home front unprotected. But yeah, again, divination. He brought the ephod and God talks to him. Some people claim that this passage shows that David was anointed of the Lord and was basically tantamount to a priest because he could use the ephod. Or maybe David put on a dog and pony show to convince people, no, don't stone me. God says I'm the only one that can rescue everybody, so we should totally go do that now. And then, of course, they pulled it off, so he gets away with the story. But either way, another case of magic. So we've got multiple, in one little story here, we've got ghosts and multiple people doing scrying. I think that's pretty wild for, a book that supposedly doesn't have magic. Yeah, David and Joel Osteen have way too much in common. It's creepy. Our next magical story is Balaam and his talking ass, or as I like to refer to this, the passive aggression of the Christ. Why do I call it that? Because Yahweh, we've set the standard that Yahweh can be a bit of a douche. In this story, he is ridiculous. But I think I have uncovered maybe a bit of a reason as to why. Never heard these David Saul stories. Never heard the magic tales. Not surprising. It is something that they leave out of a lot of Sunday school and things like that, because if they teach kids this stuff, kids will remember it because it's cool. But then it's a lot harder to say Harry Potter is evil because it's about magic. And you shouldn't play Dungeons and Dragons. All that stuff, you can't shit on it if all these stories are in your book. So it just seems like it's easier for them to pretend they're not in their book. So who is Balaam? Well, who is Balaam? Most people don't really know this guy. Little religious education in Catholic schools. Yeah, I've like I said, I believe I was talking to you and Bale the other day when I said that I have never met people who know less about their religion than Catholics. Without a doubt. You want to find somebody who has never actually read the Bible at all, doesn't know Bible stories, doesn't know theology, but yet calls himself a Christian, you're probably talking to a Catholic. All right, Balaam. He was a non-Israelite seer, and he had a reputation as a prophet for hire. And I put God's plural there because that is one of the key things I want you to remember about Balaam, is we get the impression from Balaam that Yahweh ain't the only God he talks to, that he knows Yahweh, and that he, has a kind of an understanding with him. But we get the impression that Balaam can talk to a lot of gods. And that, maybe the Israelites got a dragon, but maybe not everybody else got a dragon. Maybe some people got a thunderbird, like or the Aztecs had their big crazy, snake god that wasn't. It looked more like a snake, or some of the Native Americans worship these giant birds. Like maybe El passed out weird animals to everybody. Who knows? But apparently Balaam can talk to a lot of people. So, but he has no real allegiance. He lives kind of out in the nowhere, and he just works for whoever. Yeah, he's Tella from Final Fantasy II. Balaam is familiar with Yahweh and claims he can only do as Yahweh allows. Balaam does not claim to have any power over any of these gods. He's just like, hey, I can ask him for shit, and if he says I can do it, I can do it. If he says I can't, I can't. He's very blunt about that. That it's, he's got no power. He is a medium. He is a go-between. And he's blamed for the incident at Peor, which eventually is what gets him killed. What is the incident at Peor? Is a pretty slick bit of maneuvering by Balaam. Again, most of this is from Talmudic and research that many Hebrew scholars have done, because the Bible doesn't specifically say that Balaam did this, but we kind of think he did. What happened? While Israel was staying in Shittim, the men began to indulge in sexual immorality with Moabite women, who invited them to the sacrifices to their gods. People ate the sacrificial meal and bowed down before these gods. So Israel yoked themselves to the Baal of Peor, and the Lord's anger burned against them. The Lord said to Moses, "Take all the leaders of these people, kill them, and expose them in broad daylight before the Lord, so that the Lord's fierce anger may turn away from Israel." So Moses said to Israel's judges, "Each of you must put to death those of your people who have yoked themselves to the Baal of Peor." What had basically happened was the king of Moab had seen the Israelites coming. He had heard that they were fucking shit up and they were on their way. Eventually they were going to get to him. And he said, I got to do something about this. So he went and basically asked Balaam to put a curse on them. And Balaam said, I can't do it. Yahweh will not allow me to put a curse on them. But the idea is believed that Balaam said, but I'll tell you what you can do. If you get them to stop worshiping Yahweh, it'll piss Yahweh off. He'll take care of your problem for you. And so it is believed that it was Balaam's advice to the Moabite king Balak to have his daughter, who is the princess and kind of a leader of a cult for Baal, to go and seduce the Israelite men into joining up into their religion so that God would get angry. This little incident here, where they had to go kill everybody who had had anything to do with Baal of Peor, 24,000 people. So 24,000 people died by the Israelites' own hand because Yahweh was mad that they banged some foreigners. It was not a good scene. Not a good scene. So, let's get to the story that Balaam is actually famous for. The elders of Moab and Midian left, taking with them the fee for divination. When they came to Balaam, they told him what Balak had said. "Spend the night here," Balaam said to them, "and I will report back to you the answer the Lord gives me." So the Moabite officials stayed with him. God came to Balaam and asked, "Who are these men with you?" Balaam said to God, "Balak, son of Zippor, king of Moab, sent me this message. A people has come out of the Egypt that covers the face of the land. Now come and put a curse on them for me. Perhaps then I will be able to fight them and drive them away." But God said to Balaam, "Do not go with them. You must not put a curse on those people because they are blessed." The next morning, Balaam got up and said to Balak's officials, "Go back to your own country, for the Lord has refused to let me go with you." So the Moabite officials returned to Balak and said, "Balaam refused to come with us." Then Balak sent other officials, more numerous and more distinguished than the first. They came to Balaam and said, "This is what Balak, son of Zippor, says. Do not let anything keep you from coming to me, because I will reward you handsomely and do whatever you say. Come and put a curse on these people for me." But Balaam answered him, Even if Balak gave me all the silver and gold in his palace, I could not do anything great or small to go beyond the command of the Lord my God. Now spend the night here so that I can find out what else the Lord will tell me. That night God came to Balaam and said, Since these men have come to summon you, go with them, but do only what I tell you. Okay. Remember what that line. I put it in red very specifically. Go with them, but do only what I tell you. Balaam got up in the morning and saddled his ass and went with the Moabite officials. But God was very angry when he went. We're going to use the King James here because it's more fun. And the angel of the Lord stood in the road to oppose him. Balaam was riding on his ass, and his 2 servants were with him. Now, do you see where he got there? Balaam got up in the morning, he saddled his ass, and he went with the officials. Let's go back in case you forgot. Go with them, but do only what I tell you. And then he went with them, and God was very angry when he went. What the actual fuck? This is like that abusive boyfriend that tells his girlfriend it's okay if she goes out with her friends and then spends the entire night angry texting her that she's probably cheating on him and that he hates her because she went out with her friends. That's how Yahweh is behaving here. When the ass saw the angel of the Lord standing in the road with a sword drawn in his hand, it turned off the road into a field. Balaam beat it to get it back on the road. Then the angel of the Lord stood in a narrow path through the vineyards, with walls on both sides. When the ass saw the angel of the Lord, it pressed close to the wall, crushing Balaam's foot against it. So he beat that ass again. Then the angel of the Lord moved on and ahead and stood in a narrow place where there was no room to turn, either to the left or to the right. When the ass saw the angel of the Lord, it lay down under Balaam, and he was angry and beat it with his staff. Then the Lord opened the ass's mouth, and it said to Balaam, What have I done to you to make you beat me these 3 times? There's that number again. Balaam answered the ass, You have made a fool of me. Now wait just a fucking minute. The donkey just talked to this dude. And there is no mention of Balaam's shock anywhere here. And I feel like that is insane. The fucking donkey just started talking to you, and you just roll with it. So either Balaam has been doing some wild shit, or, they just omitted that detail, I guess. But to me, that seems pretty insane. He said, What have I done to make you beat me these 3 times? And Balaam answered the ass, You've made a fool of me. If only I had a sword in my hand, I would kill you right now. And the ass said to Balaam, I am not your own ass. Am I not your own ass, which you have always ridden to this day? Have I been in the habit of doing this to you? No, he said. And basically, at that point, Yahweh allows Balaam to see that there's an angel there with a sword, and that's why the donkey wouldn't go forward. And he says, What are you doing, Balaam? And Balaam says, I'm doing what you told me to do. I'm going to talk to the king. And God says, Oh, okay, yeah, that's fine. But remember, don't you dare put a curse on my people. So the 3 thing happens again. Balak, the king, takes Balaam to one peak, says, Go out. Look, you can see the Israelite army coming. Curse them. Balaam says, I can't. They go to another place. He offers them even more money. Balaam says, I can't. They go to a third place. He offers Balaam even more money. Balaam says, I can't curse them. God said I'm not allowed. And so at that point, Balak gives up, and he would eventually go on to lose horrifically against the Israelites in battle, who would then kill Balaam as well, claiming that he was the one that gave Balak the idea to try to use, getting Yahweh pissy with them, as he is an ass man. And that is how Balaam dies. Now, there's a little something that I want to go into before we wrap up today, because I find this really fucking interesting. Why did Yahweh care so much about Balaam putting a curse on them? If he's the one true God, what would he care if some dude puts a curse on his people? Because it's not going to do anything, right? Unless magic is real, why would he care? And also, why wouldn't God just kill Balaam himself? Maybe it's because all those other gods Balaam talked to had a little input themselves. And maybe Yahweh was trying to avoid starting an inter-god rumble. So he just had to play, he had to let his people kill Balaam, but he wasn't going to intervene and do it himself. Just a thought, because he seems to care an awful lot about Balaam putting this curse on his people, and he is very specific about him not being allowed to do it. And it really doesn't strike me as having a purpose. Like, why would he care what Balaam does unless Balaam had power? Like, maybe he was a fucking wizard. And that actually makes him kind of awesome. And it would also then make a talking donkey seem not that surprising to him. Like, yeah, dude, I'm a fucking wizard. The donkey talks, so watch. You want to hear? It's called retconning history. Kind of the same way Thomas Jefferson wasn't, a likely autistic weirdo who was, raping the slaves. Let's call it what it was, and was a super jack off. But yet he's now, that's not really how he's remembered. It's kind of that kind of revisionist history. People that say the Civil War wasn't about slavery. But we could definitely do a deep dive into how David was able to pull it all over. And basically, the main thing that they were able to do is retroactively David was connected to Christ, and they were basically saying that Jesus descended from David himself, and so that therefore David by proxy becomes a saint that way. It's really messed up, but so is most of this book. So thank you everyone for being here this week. Thank you for bearing with the time changes, the technical difficulties, all that stuff. I really appreciate it. We will be back at our regularly scheduled time next week of 10 a.m. And we've got a fun one next week. It's going to be, we're going to bring back a segment. I'm not telling you which one. You'll just have to wait and see. But one of our segments from season 1 is making an appearance next week. So I hope you tune in for that. I hope you enjoy the rest of your Sunday. Our good friend Kurt Cummings is going to be playing some games in a little bit here, and that's going to be a rad time. So you should hop over there and check out the stuff. That's what I'm going to do while I make some dinner and continue to enjoy these domestos. So thank you so much for being here this week. Thanks for bearing with the issues. I think it's all the pouring down rain outside is fucking with my Wi-Fi, and that was what was going on. So we did it. So thank you so much for being here, everybody. Have a great rest of your Sunday, and don't let Monday get you down too far. And remember, there is magic in the world.